You know, when you think about the Supreme Court today, you think of this incredibly powerful institution. Its decisions literally shape American life. But it wasn't always that way, not even close. For its first decade, the Supreme Court was practically an afterthought. The story of how it became a true co-equal branch of government, well, that's really the story of one man, John Marshall. So let's dive into how he pulled it off. I mean, the difference is just staggering. Before John Marshall took over as Chief Justice in 1801, the Supreme Court was so insignificant it didn't even have its own building. They met in a cramped committee room in the basement of the Capitol. In its entire first decade, it barely made a dent. But under Marshall's leadership, for 34 years, it was completely transformed into the powerhouse we know today, issuing over 1,000 decisions. And that's really the big question here, isn't it? How on earth did one person, through sheer brainpower and political skill, take this weak, fledgling court and build it into one of the three pillars of American government? The answer is a fantastic story of rivalry, genius, and a powerful vision for a new nation. And right at the heart of this whole story is one of the greatest rivalries in American history. It's this ideological and very personal battle between John Marshall and his famous cousin, Thomas Jefferson. These two men had completely opposite ideas about what America should be. What's so wild is how much they had in common. They were both Virginians, they were distant cousins from the same influential family, and they even studied law under the exact same legendary professor. But all that shared history just seemed to make their differences sharper. Marshall was a Federalist. He believed the country needed a strong, powerful central government to survive. Jefferson, he was a Republican who was all about states' rights. He was terrified that a strong central government would just become another form of tyranny. And you can see this clash perfectly in how they reacted to Shays' Rebellion. This was an uprising of farmers drowning in debt back in 1787. For Marshall, watching this chaos was an absolute nightmare. It was proof that without a strong government to keep order, the whole American experiment could just fall apart into mob rule. Jefferson saw the exact same event and came to the complete opposite conclusion. For him, a little rebellion now and then, that's a good thing. He saw it as a sign that people were paying attention, a way to keep the government in check. To him, the real danger wasn't the people protesting, it was a government that got too powerful. And this fundamental disagreement set the stage for their biggest showdown. And that showdown came in the legendary case of Marbury v. Madison. Now, this wasn't just some dry legal dispute. Oh no. This was a high-stakes political chess match between Marshall's Supreme Court and the brand new administration of President Thomas Jefferson. The setup here is pure political theater. After losing a really nasty election in 1800, the outgoing president, John Adams, and his Federalist Party scrambled to hold on to power. In their final hours, they created a bunch of new judge positions and filled them with their own guys, people called the midnight judges. But in the chaos, not all of the official paperwork, the commissions, got delivered. So when Jefferson took office, he saw his opening. He told his Secretary of State, James Madison, "Don't deliver them." And one of those guys who didn't get his job, William Marbury, decided to sue. You see, this put Chief Justice Marshall in a totally impossible spot. It was a perfect trap. If the court ordered Jefferson's administration to deliver the commission, everyone knew Jefferson would just ignore them, and that would make the court look laughably weak. But if the court didn't issue the order, it would look like they were just scared of the president, totally caving to political pressure. Either way, it looked like the Supreme Court was doomed. So, what did Marshall do? He came up with one of the most brilliant legal moves in all of history. First, he said, yes, absolutely, Mr. Marbury has a right to his job. Then, second, he said, and yes, the law should give him a way to get it. But then came the twist, the genius part. Marshall said the specific law that gave the Supreme Court the power to force the issue was actually unconstitutional. So in the end, his conclusion was, sorry, can't issue the order. Case dismissed. And that was the masterstroke. By giving up that one small power in this one specific case, Marshall claimed a much, much bigger one for the court forever, the power of judicial review. This is the idea that the Supreme Court gets to look at a law passed by Congress and say, nope, this violates the Constitution, so it's void. It made the court the final word on what the Constitution actually means.
And he summed it all up with these iconic words in his decision. He wasn't just settling a single dispute, he was defining the role of the entire judicial branch for all of American history to come. He'd completely outsmarted Jefferson, establishing the court as an equal branch of government without ever having to pick a direct fight he knew he would lose.
But Marshall was just getting started. Marbury v. Madison was just the foundation. Over the next 30 years, he used his power on the court to systematically build a stronger and more unified nation, just like his Federalist philosophy called for. And he just kept going. Just look at these other huge cases. In McCulloch v. Maryland, the court said that Congress has implied powers that aren't explicitly written down, and that states can't mess with federal institutions. That was a huge win for federal power over the states. Then, just a couple of years later in Cohans v. Virginia, the court declared it had the right to review decisions made by state courts. With every single ruling, Marshall's court was laying another brick in the foundation of a powerful central government.
So we've seen Marshall the legal giant, the nation builder. But to really get the full picture, we have to look at Marshall the man. And he's a figure just full of deep, profound, and frankly, troubling contradictions.
I mean, the scale of his influence is almost hard to wrap your head around. 34 years. He served as Chief Justice for 34 years. That's still the longest anyone has ever held the job, and he used that time to shape American law for an entire generation.
And during that long tenure, his court handed down over 1,000 decisions. But what's really mind-blowing is that nearly all of them were unanimous. That just speaks volumes about his power of persuasion and his ability to build consensus, even with justices who were appointed by his political enemies.
But then there's this. This is the stark, unavoidable paradox at the very heart of his legacy. The man who did more than almost anyone to define American law and the concept of liberty was, for his entire life, a major slave owner who bought and sold hundreds of human beings. And this is where it gets really complicated. He's the architect of American constitutional law. At the same time, he was an unrepentant slaveholder whose legal opinions often protected the institution of slavery. He would admit in private that slavery violated natural law, yet he never freed the people he enslaved, not even in his will. He was also a big supporter of the American Colonization Society, a group whose goal wasn't to abolish slavery, but to send free Black Americans to Africa. It is a deeply challenging and contradictory part of his story that we just can't ignore.
So, how do we sum all this up? How do we make sense of this towering, complicated figure? Well, the truth is, his influence echoes through every single legal and political debate we have in America today.
In the end, John Marshall completely won his ideological war with Thomas Jefferson, and Jefferson himself knew it. This quote from him just captures it perfectly. He saw the court, led by his cousin, quietly moving like a thief, step by step, taking power away from the states and concentrating it in the federal government. And that right there is his legacy. More than any other person, John Marshall dragged the Supreme Court out of a basement and made it the powerful final interpreter of the Constitution that it is today. He really was the man who made the Supreme Court. Which leaves us with one last big question for today. Marshall's great accomplishment was creating this powerful, independent court to act as a check on the president and Congress. But in our time, with all the debates raging about the court's power and its role in society, we have to ask, does that power still work the way Marshall intended? Does it still serve as the ultimate safeguard of the Constitution?